Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Kelly Rivers, and I'm a professor of English here at Pellissippi State Community College. It is my pleasure and honor to offer the last presentation of the Blount County campus edition of Women's History Month 2023. My presentation today, as you can see, is entitled The Power of Smut, Sex, Feminism, and Romance Novels. So the national theme this year in the United States for National Women's History Month is Women as Storytellers. So here at Pellissippi State, our Women's History Month committee came together and decided to tweak that title just a bit. So we added another moniker, Women as Storytellers and History Makers. But those of us here at Blount County wanted to go just a bit further. And some of the earlier presentations this week focused on these ideas of women behaving badly. And so my presentation today about smut, sex, and romance novels wraps up this sort of trilogy, this look at blunt women behaving badly and talking about it, telling their tales. So before we get started talking about sex and feminism and romance novels, a few definitions, working definitions need to be established. And so first and foremost, what is a romance novel? Is anything with love in it a romance novel? And the simple definition is yes. Any novel or novella or work that includes a love story, the coupling of two individuals, and the development of that relationship over time. So what kinds of romance genres are there? Well, according to the Harlequin publishing house, which is one of the largest romance publishing houses in the world, there are over a dozen different categories of romance. And of course, some authors and titles overmingle. But these categories include historical romances, also Regency, contemporary romance, paranormal romance, young adult, fantasy, erotica, romantic suspense, Western romance, and inspirational romance. And then the question I get an awful lot from non-romance readers is, do all romance novels include sex? And the answer is no. The only qualifications or characteristics for a romance novel is that they are about love and they have a happy ending. Writers will tell you there are two other key moments. There has to be a dark moment that the couple has to overcome, and there has to be a happily ever after, or the HEA. But any level of physical contact between the protagonists, the hero and the heroine, that is up to the author, the style that they might write in, but also the category and genre in which the book is being published. So what is feminism? Well, I read on a t-shirt once that feminism is, quote, the radical idea of that women are human beings. That's a dismissive, but yet accurate description. But a real and basic definition is that feminism is the belief that all genders are entitled to equal rights and opportunities. So this doesn't mean women are better than men and that men are the downfall of society. It basically means both are equal and deserve equal treatment and the opportunity to the best of their abilities. And the final question, do feminists hate men? Absolutely not. There is a radical sect, radical feminism, that often does place blame on men, but feminism as a whole, a political, social movement, embraces men and encourages men to get involved. The true enemy of feminism is the patriarchy, or this existing social status that privileges one person's power and ability based on whether or not they have a penis. So before I get started, I do want to start with a disclaimer that this presentation will include adult themes and concepts. However, I will be showing no graphic images and nor any adult language will be used. So let's talk about sex, but not in the way that you think about. By its simplest definition, this is smut. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, smut is a particle of sooty matter. That is it. But according to the interwebs, if you do a deep dive or even a general dive, smut refers to, quote, fictional works of art that are of a sexual nature, including but not limited to writing where characters engage in any sort of sexual activity. Pause there for a second. Any sort of sexual activity. That includes kissing. So any book that involves kissing, according to this definition of internet slang, would be smut. Our favorite Urban Dictionary says, smut is a writing style that is sexually explicit, generally associated with females, basically pornography aimed towards women. But there are some consequences to these social definitions, connotations, and stereotypes. Readers of novels that contain sex or any sort of romantic encounters, from the simplest kiss to the raunchiest BDSM scene, often feel scrutinized, ashamed, and judged based on their reading preferences. So much so that most of the 20th century and up until the last 20-25 years, many readers hid the covers of their romance novels behind more serious images, or they chose friendly covers that wouldn't offend or shock or clue anyone into that they might be reading sex. The definition of a romance novel as smut also led to the stereotyping of readers as usually dull or boring, sexually frustrated. A really popular one is old women with lots and lots of cats, and housewives with unrealistic expectations about men. Stereotypes like these were fed mostly by the romance industry itself, and namely the cover art. As you can see, I've picked a random selection of some very popular 1970s and 80s romance titles and authors. These cover art depictions were often formulaic. You see often the same model, and just in the few that I have here, Fabio appears in 3 of them, with different hairstyles, different clothing. But the covers and the titles were often more shocking and revealing than what actually goes on in the book. And it's these covers, the literal outside of a book, is what led many readers to hide or to feel ashamed. But if you look closely at these images, you see that these are incredibly unrealistic depictions of men and women in impossible and incredibly uncomfortable positions. And these positions, with lighting, and the fan is the most important prop in photo shoots like this. These images were designed to titillate, excite, and arouse readers into buying the book, but not necessarily reading it in public. So the images like these led to the misnomer of romance novels being referred to as bodice rippers. And of course, these typically historical novels, as the ones on the screen here, got their name or their nickname from the violent action that the hero would use in forcibly undressing a woman during the medieval, the Renaissance, Victorian, the Regency period, where a woman would wear a corset, and in order to get to her bosom and to her breasts, the only way he could get to it is through an impatient tearing and ripping, where laces and stays would go flying everywhere. But also note the incredibly odd titles of some of these. Again, these titles are often salacious, and it is important to note that not all romance authors choose their titles. These titles are often chosen by the publishing house or editors. So titles like Sweet Savage Love, a very famous novel by Rosemary Rogers, and Shanna by Kathleen Woody Weiss, While Passion Sleeps, and By Love Undone. These are, again, mysterious and intriguing, but very sexualized in nature, which affirms this stereotype that if you read one of these novels, you're reading it purely for the sex and nothing more than that. But the reality is much different. Recent Amazon figures indicate that the romance and erotica genre of fiction, both in the print and the ebook formats, generated over $1.4 billion last year alone. That's 2022, $1.44 billion. The appeal of this genre also translates into viewership as well, as our culture becomes much more visual in nature. We see this with the 2014 adaptation of Diana Gabaldon's 1991 novel series Outlander, which premiered in 2014 on Starz, pulling in 3.7 million viewers during its opening weekend. And note that Starz is a subscription service. It's not on basic cable. In addition, in recent years, the runaway success of the Netflix adaptations of Julia Quinn's Bridgerton novels, of which there are 8. So far, 2 have been adapted in seasons 1 and seasons 2. And according to most recent data, seasons 1 and seasons 2 of Bridgerton are in the top 5 most watched Netflix series in history. They fall short of only Stranger Things season 4. So currently, Bridgerton seasons 1 and 2 hold the spots 2 and 3 respectively. So therefore, the appeal of the romance genre, whether it's the written word or the adaptation to the screen, indicates that the readership and demand for these novels is far deeper and more complex than these basic stereotypes about sexually frustrated women or lonely women with cats. So looking at some of the data, I turned to a researcher who is also a romance novelist, Maya Rodell. And in 2015, she conducted an extensive survey of readers and romance industry executives. And she conducted surveys that lasted many months and garnered thousands of points of data. And she revealed through her research and the subsequent publishing of her book, Dangerous Books for Girls, that the readership for romance novels is typically not what we expect. As the infographic shows here, that only 84% of the readership of romance novels is female. Men read them too. That the average age of a romance novelist, a romance reader, is not the old frustrated woman, but it's also not the giggling preteen. It's women between the ages of 30 and 54. The average income of a romance reader is middle class, $55,000. And that's a sole income. That's not taking into account if she's married or not. Only 59% have a spouse or significant other. And 70% of the readers discover the genre between the ages of 11 and 18. And full disclosure, I discovered it at 11, went on a family road trip. One of the novels my mother was reading fell out of her travel bag, and while she was asleep, I snuck it and read it in the car. Sorry, Mom. 60% of female readers, romance readers, identify themselves as feminist, probably because they don't necessarily understand the full definition of the term, and 35% buy romance novels more than once a month. Now, of course, this data from 2015 has changed in the last 6.5, 7 years due to industry changes and the shift to ebooks and digital formats as opposed to buying your books in brick and mortar stores, which are very quickly disappearing. Right? But the most important thing I want to point out is in the bottom of this infographic, that the story is the #1 factor in whether or not a reader decides to purchase or read the book. Not sex, not what's on the cover, not necessarily who wrote it, but it's the story. So this data indicates who these readers are and what they want in both their heroes and their heroines. So to dive just a little bit deeper, if we look at what the results say, according to this survey, about what romance readers want in their heroes, right? So conventionally speaking, they're male protagonists. If you notice, the number one by and far characteristic, over 80%, is a sense of humor. Not money, not physique, not name or social status or penis size. It's, is he funny? Second, honesty and integrity. Third, kindness. Again, not necessarily that image we see from those bodice ripper covers, of the previous slide, of this domineering, overly masculine man taking a dominating position over an inferior woman in a subordinate position. As to the alpha heroes and the beta heroes, an alpha hero is for lack of a better term, a manly man, a strong, confident, very physical figure. A beta hero is someone who is still strong, still confident, but not necessarily as physical, right? So think of the difference in the sexual appeal of, say, a construction worker versus a chemist, right? They are both incredibly sexy occupations, but one is seen as more alpha, take charge leader, and one is much more communicative, collaborative, and empathetic, engaging. An interesting statistic, do romance heroes give real-life women unrealistic expectations, right? Barely 10% said yes. That's 90% of romance readers said, no, these don't set us up for failure. These heroes don't set these unrealistic expectations that I'm going to find some 6'4" half-breed stumbling through the park one day who's going to come and save me as I drown, and he's going to save my puppy while he's at it. And another interesting statistic on this infographic is that 21% of readers think that there are not enough virgin heroes. So the expectation and assumption is that any romance hero comes to this relationship as a worldly experienced lover. Well, in many incredibly popular and successful novels, including Outlander, that is not the case. That the male heroes discover their sexuality along with the heroine. And as you can tell, 21%, almost a quarter of romance readers, say they need more of that. Right? But what about the heroines? So the heroines, the women who want a man to come in and sweep them off their feet and take care of them and make them safe and be strong and protective for them. But for readers, the most important qualities for a heroine are that she's intelligent, that she's funny, she's independent and confident and experienced. Now that's an important key, especially when we're thinking about the term and how this links to feminism. Experienced, both sexually and otherwise. The notion of completely virginal heroines is not appealing to today's romance reader because of the unrealistic expectation that sets, right? That your first time is going to be with your forever person, as one of the authors I interviewed states. Right? So the truth behind the stereotypes and the expectations set by the non-romance reading public for the most part, if I'm going to be fair, the equation looks a little bit like this. We've got smut plus a woman equals bad. So that basically smut as a label was attached to romance novels primarily due to the inclusion of female sexuality, whether that take place in behind closed doors, implied encounters. Again, not all romance novels feature sexual scenes. Some of it is implied. The two disappear behind a door, the door closes, the reader is left to their imagination. But then we also have graphic and explicit depictions of sexual intercourse. Still, female sexuality. But if we go back to the original definition of smut as a sooty particle, we can infer that that particle somehow corrupts or changes the purity of a surface or the object that it touches. Therefore, we can deduce that romance novels have been equated with smut because they show women having, enjoying, and initiating sex, which somehow, therefore, diminishes or corrupts the perceived innocence. Or, in the words of Maya Rodel, romance novels demonstrate again and again that true happiness happens when two people find and prioritize love. Or, most scandalous of all, these are books by women, for women, and about women in a culture that doesn't place much value on women. The feminism inherent in romance novels is not political. It doesn't matter who gets elected or who runs for office. It doesn't seek to overthrow the patriarchy and replace it with some female goddess-centric society or coven. The feminism in romance novels depicts women who are flawed, damaged, often extremely traumatized by life experiences, but women who seek relationships with others, both romantic and not, as a way of growing and developing as a human being and a woman. Romance novel heroines are not driven by weakness, a sense of inferiority, dependency, or lust. They want agency. They want the ability to become the person they want to be. They want to find the person who will support and love them as they become that person. So therefore, feminism in romance novels is true and simply put, the acceptance of oneself as an individual with needs, physical needs, emotional needs, intellectual needs, and spiritual, and the pursuit of the fulfillment of those needs. So to discover what women who write these type of novels think about the stereotypes associated with their genre, I conducted an experiment. I went to the source, or specifically 4 sources. 2 other authors respectfully declined my request, although they were interested. They were on active deadlines and could not participate. But as I have told my students time and time again, if there's something you want to know and there is someone who can provide you an answer, reach out. So that's what I did. I chose my 6 favorite romance novelists. I am, as my t-shirt proclaims, feminists read romance. I am a die-hard romance reader, have been for over 30 years, and will continue to be. I reached out to my 6 favorite romance writers. As I said, 4 responded very quickly. Each author I contacted is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author who has won multiple industry awards, either given by readers, peers, or by publishers. In order to gather information, I designed a set of questions, interview questions, that was sent to each woman via email. So let me introduce you to some of my favorite writers and then share their responses. First, we have Lori Foster. These are in alphabetical order, by the way, simply to be fair. Lori Foster is a New York Times, USA Today Publishers Weekly best-selling author. She has published more than 100 titles in multiple genres, including some titles that have been translated and transformed into manga. Right? Her website, lorifoster.com, is a wealth of information, and I have included 16 random selections of the cover art from her book. I spent more time deciding on which covers to use for each author than I did most of this presentation because there were just so many great titles to choose from. Author number 2, Karen Hawkins, formerly an East Tennessee resident. Point of fact, her daughter is a Pellissippi State graduate of the English program, so yay us. Karen Hawkins is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. She's published over 35 full-length novels and novellas. And once again, very interesting selection of covers. Karen Hawkins primarily used to write in Regency and historical romances, and as of late has drifted into more contemporary small-town romance. Her upcoming novel is The Secret Recipe of Ella Dove, and Laurie Foster's most recent release is The Dangerous One. That is also the title included on the slide. Third, Kristen Higgins, a New York Times and USA Today and Publishers Weekly bestselling author, published more than 20 novels, which have been translated into more than 24 different languages. Her forthcoming release is A Little Ray of Sunshine, up in the upper left corner. And finally, Jill Shalvis, also a New York Times and USA Today bestselling author, has published more than 62 novels and novellas. Between her and Laurie Foster, it took me quite a while to choose my favorites. The Sweetheart List is her forthcoming production. So I asked these women a series of questions, and I don't have time, nor will I bore you in reading their answers verbatim, and I didn't include their answers to all of the questions that I asked, but I picked the questions to share with you the most revealing answers. And I'll just cover the highlights of what I think their answers reveal about them as writers, them as women, but also their awareness of our current society. And so the first question I asked them was a very basic one. What does the term feminist mean to you? And do you consider yourself a feminist or not? Because again, I'm not going to assume that every woman is. Laurie Foster answers, a feminist, in my opinion, is a woman who chooses to live her life as she sees fit. And for me, I thought this was a really important distinction because she emphasizes, again, a feminist is strong enough and secure enough to choose the life that she prefers. Notice that her language here has nothing to do with political power or physical strength. It has everything to do with personal choice. And as she says, you know, you could be a businesswoman, you could be a stay-at-home mom, you can be a waitress, you can own your own business, you could put your husband at the center of your life, but you're still a feminist if you are living the life you prefer. Karen Hawkins, also a former professor, says very clearly, yes, I am a feminist. I believe and support gender equality, and I can't think of a single logical reason not to be. How she defines it is both sexes being treated equally in terms of rights, pay, and treatment. Again, no mention of physical strength or who is better. Kristen Higgins has another, yet interesting and deep answer to this. Is, of course, yes, I'm a feminist, but as she says, feminist really means humanist. And that people should be acknowledged for their abilities, their intellects, and their gifts. We should all have the same choices and opportunities. Feminism should mean the right to choose our education, our career, our health care, our marital status, sports, everything. And Jill Shalvis agrees by saying that, to me, the term feminist means a person who believes in women's rights, basic and otherwise. So I'm absolutely a feminist, and LOL, I love it when my husband opens the door for me. Me too. So these four women offer us as readers and fellow women or citizens of the world an insight as to what this kind of controversial political title means and how it impacts what they have decided to do with their lives. So the second question that I asked, along the same lines, is what does the descriptor strong woman mean to you, and what makes a female character strong? And I asked this question simply because I didn't want to presume that every romance heroine or every woman in a romance novel, whether she is the main character or not, is in it for the love. They're more than that. These characters are much more complex and layered. And Foster says, strong women are survivors. Giving up is easy, but pushing forward takes core strength. Right? She says, I love times when Hollywood has gotten it right, with Sigourney Weaver in the Alien franchise or Linda Hamilton in the Terminator series. Each started out as an everyday woman who, under extreme pressure or danger, still managed to pull it together and handle business, especially when protecting someone else. Strong women can be loving, nurturing, and caring. Doesn't have to be in your face or to prove a point. Strength can be quiet, and it can be dignified, and it can lead by example. Hawkins agrees. A strong woman is a person who controls their own narrative, someone in charge of their lives. A strong female character is one who grows and develops as a person in spite of the limitations on their circumstances. Fiction is a shadow of real life, and she, as she says, has been inspired by a lot of real-life women. And she likes writing historical romance novels because she gets to reveal an often undiscovered and undiscussed truth that women in history did not fall under that stereotype of we have to stay at home and take care of the kids and mind the house. No. They ran massively successful businesses, as she said. They became expert craftsmen. They took on leadership roles, usually reserved for men, in craft guilds, and some of them were pirates. Some awesome women were pirates and explorers, but we don't hear about them because they don't conform. But they are still strong women. Kristen Higgins describes her understanding of strong woman to mean emotional honesty. That she wants her characters to know, quote, what they want, acknowledge why they don't have it, and go after it, even at great personal risk. They have to face their insecurities and fears, and they have to care deeply for others because that's a huge part of strength. How can you be strong if you're only serving yourself? And I think that's a really important question, both in life, but also to consider in the context of the appeal of any woman as storyteller or woman as character. And for Jill Shalvis, a strong woman means that she's fully capable of taking care of herself. Implied in this answer is everything that the other three women said. Taking care, fully capable, but still nurturing, even if it's nurturing yourself. Third question. Your female characters display varying levels of toughness. Some of them have experienced extreme trauma. Why is it important to you to write about women who aren't your typical upper middle class, white, cis, straight, girl next door types? I will admit, because I am familiar with the female characters in the novels of these four women, this was a targeted and deliberate question. Foster says that everyone deals with something. So the implication being, why shouldn't the fictional characters in her books do the same thing? She says, I like to write characters who are dealing with their stuff. And hopefully along the way they find someone who shares the right kind of understanding and support to help them find a better life together. Again, that goes back to my earlier point about that's what a romance reader wants. It's what a romance heroine wants. Fulfillment and hopefully someone to support her in that quest. Hawkins adds, I want to experience life through the eyes, thoughts, feelings of someone I might want to be. I always try to write characters who face their challenges in ways that I hope I might. So this speaks to the escapist appeal of romance fiction for many readers. But she continues, if I don't respect the character, then how can a reader? So as an author, she has to respect her own creation because she wants others to as well. The best way to respect the character, she says, is for them to grow over the course of the book, face extraordinary odds, and become stronger and better as the story progresses. Higgins has a very blunt answer. My women have been through some serious shit. And if you've read her novels, yes, they have. She says, one of the most interesting things to the reader and to her as the author is to suss out why a person is the way that she is. So the kind of the psychological layers to her. One of my heroines was almost murdered. One was abandoned by her mother. One had a baby at 17 and never told anyone. I don't want to read about nice people who've had nice lives and do nice things. I need more than sexy banter and steamy love scenes to be entertained, so enter the trauma, the scars, the sadness, simply because it's the human condition. I want my heroines to be great examples of how we get through the dark times and into the light. And Shalvis adds, life is hard, so I like to reflect the times. Now notice something that none of these women have said so far. Not one of them has mentioned sex or frivolity or personal pleasure or anything surface level. All of these women design heroines and stories that are based on struggle, perseverance, growth, and development. So I also had to ask if they found it harder to write women or female or male characters, and why that was. Because in writing, as a professor of literature, I have been told, taught, and have taught that it's very difficult to accurately capture the experience of someone you are not, which is why it is often said that women can't write men and men can't write women. White people cannot write people of color, and vice versa. Foster responds to that. She says, writing women is a little bit more challenging. And I'll hazard a guess to say it's because I'm unlike many of the women in my books. I'm not comfortable lumping men in as a group. She's vehemently opposed to stereotyping. If you read her novels, you will see her men are not stereotypes. The guys I've known are great fun, not easily insulting. They are brave and protective, and they care about people, especially the people they love. They are well organized, they wouldn't acknowledge being sick or hurt even if they were missing a limb. Stubborn. Men are every bit as complex and unique as women, just in a different way. I respect men a lot, and I expect women a lot. And I respect the differences in all of the people. And if any two could fall in love and have a happy life, then that's worth celebrating. Hawkins says, I love writing both because I love reading both. I use both female and male beta readers, right? Which basically means she sends out copy to readers to get their feedback, to make sure that she's being accurate and not assumptive in her descriptions. Kristen Higgins acknowledges that she didn't start writing from the male point of view until 7 or 8 books into her career, and it was simply because she wanted to try something different. And as her point of what would a man do, as she says, I look over at my husband, a manly, brave firefighter, whom she refers to as McIrish on her blog, and adjusts accordingly. And Shalvis adds, I love both, but I especially love writing men. I don't know why, other than I truly love men. And again, I can attest to this. Her male characters are riotous, and I fall in love with every single one of them every single time. But I had to ask the question. Oh, I didn't pause that. What about sex? Is it a crucial part of the identity of these female heroines? Is it secondary? Is it a form of empowerment? What do you think? I'll start with the bottom here. Shalvis says, very simply, sex is part of romantic relationships. I write about romantic relationships, so it's a natural and very real fit. But what she doesn't say here is that her sex scenes are not for sex for sex's sake. Each one has a motivation, an intention, and a purpose for being there. But Laurie Foster, going back, as romance develops, sex becomes important even if it hadn't been there. Sex can just be sex. It can be perfunctory or awesome. It can be a nuisance. It can be a take it or leave it thing, or maybe circumstances keep it out of reach, or it could be a way of coping with others. She points in particular to an example of a hero from one of her books who uses sex as a coping mechanism. But with the right person, the character's forever person, sex is very, very important as a point of connection. Hawkins takes this from a writer's perspective, and what does sex reveal about a character or the relationship? Right? So when you're talking about relationships, she says, the love scene can be an engaging, crucial moment for both characters and can give a glimpse of the depth of the feelings involved. So again, this isn't just as my mother used to say, a wham bam, thank you ma'am thing, that this is an emotional exchange. These moments, Hawkins continues, can explain not just who an individual is, but their perceptions of themselves within the relationship. So it's not what can I get from this person, but what can I give and what am I getting from this exchange? Higgins, once again, is very blunt in her response. She says sex is empowering and women shouldn't shy away from owning their wants and needs and communicating with them with their partner, but I believe that sex is much more empowering when it is a sign of trust, of a relationship becoming more meaningful rather than for the sake of an orgasm. And depending on the category or genre of romance that you read, orgasms are plentiful. But as Higgins points out, they are not the point. An observation that goes back and contradicts the stereotypes of romance writing and readers of what women want. My next question, I reference a very particular, and I hate to use this term, but seminal work, a 1972 novel by Kathleen Woody-Weiss called The Flame in the Flower. This was not the first romance novel that I read, but it was one up there on the list. My grandmother had a copy, and I shamelessly stole it when I was 13 and read it until it fell apart. I did replace it. But in The Flame in the Flower, the hero is a sea captain by the name of Brandon Birmingham, and the heroine is a young woman who is fleeing from a dangerous situation and takes refuge on his boat in the harbor. He mistakes her for a prostitute, rapes her, and then takes her with him to the American colonies. So this is a rape fantasy novel where he rapes her thinking that she is a prostitute because I guess he thinks he can do that, and then feels guilty, marries her, and true love develops afterwards. So my question was, how do you think the genre has changed in its approach to the way that women, or what role that they play? And do you think a novel like The Flame in the Flower could be published today? All of them agree, no, it would never be published in 2023. But Foster says they still have their place because some readers still enjoy them. Not necessarily the rape fantasy part of it, but these are historical romance novels where the men were all powerful, and the women not only learned to survive, but to conquer the men by stealing their hearts, armed only with their intelligence, cunning, and caring natures. I think that line is really important, that women, for lack of a better term, changed men, but stole their hearts only by being who they were, intelligent, cunning, and caring. Right. Hawkins is very much like me. I read the book in the 80s and I loved it. I read it a few years ago and I hated it. Right. The writing is strong, but the heroine is annoying. And I would agree with that assessment as well. But she also continues to say that she thinks that those novels were written with a super young female lead who would develop slowly and become passionate, strong women. And her observation is that today, I want that on page 1. I don't want that to be the end of the novel. I want that to be page 1. Higgins had a much more complex and deep answer. I had a very hard time editing it. But she points out something incredibly important as well, that social norms have dictated that novels like The Flame and the Flower and rape fantasies are taboo. Falling in love with your rapist is never going to be acceptable to me, right? But these bodice rippers were written in a time when women didn't really talk about sexual pleasure and where there were few resources to learn from. Now, she's talking about the 1970s and 80s, and she's absolutely right. Nice girls were supposed to be chaste, married women, dutiful, and accommodating where sex was concerned. I often think about that Queen Victoria telling her daughter on your wedding night, lie back and think of England, right? Once you couldn't have kids, you were supposed to stop having sex, or at least stop talking about it, because sex was for procreation only. So those rape fantasy, and as she clearly, succinctly puts out, emphasis on fantasy allowed them to get some access to their own sexuality, right? And she also points out that there have been current analogies, one being the overly popular 50 Shades of Grey series, where men like Christian Grey have to hurt a woman, using Higgins' words, in order to get off, who show their love by stalking, telling her how to dress, what to eat, where to go. And in her mind, that's a form of abuse. But an important point that she says at the end, these days romance novels allow, encourage, and sometimes instruct women to embrace their sexuality, their wants, and their needs. They get to talk about it. We get to experiment with it, to lean into sex as a healthy, happy, important part of a relationship, whether they save it for marriage or have slept with 20 partners. Romance novels today are light on judgment, but heavy on integrity. And again, I applaud and agree with that answer. But as data has proven in the past, that romance novels are read not only by women, but men. So I did ask about their male readership. Foster says, my readers are far and above women, but I have a fair share of men. I'm often told that I, quote, get men, how they speak, how they act, the things they think. And more importantly, I accept that while they're often different in how they view things, they are not necessarily wrong. Different is good, balance is good, contrasts are good. Nature gave us differences for a reason. Hawkins reveals something that the head of sales at HarperCollins, another large publishing house, told her, that around 15% of all romance sales were to men, which was up from 9% 10 years ago. And she gets a lot of fan mail from men too. Many of them in the armed forces who got the books from the commissary. Many tell me they love the humor and the adventurous plots. I've written about pirates, smugglers, duels in the moonlight, lost and found treasures, military battles, spies, and a host of other fun and exciting plots and settings, so I get that. And Hawkins points out here something, a readership that is often overlooked, and a readership that I think, in my personal opinion, is most pressured to hide it, and that's men in the military. Romance novels are very popular among military bases. They are circulated and shared. They are fast reads, they are easy reads, and they are a form of escapism. Higgins chimes in on this question about readership, and she says, most of the male readers I hear from are married, straight men, with a few gay men as well, and they are drawn to the humor, quite frankly, and Higgins' books are quite amusing and funny. Maybe their wife or their mom is reading one of their books and laughing out loud. They pick it up and start reading it and get sucked in. This happened with my son-in-law a couple years ago before he married my daughter. He had nothing to read at the beach, so my daughter handed him one of my books. He started reading it and was laughing, saying, wow, this is really good. Again, judgment often keeps people from experimenting. Right? And the last question I asked my authors is, what are their predictions? Where do they see the romance genre heading in the next decade or so? So many industry changes have taken place, whether it is the physical location of booksellers, with the brick and mortar stores disappearing and more sales being online, and digital books and audiobooks being produced at a much faster rate and sold at different prices from paperback or even hardback copies. So I asked them what they thought about these incoming shifts and what were their observations. Foster focuses on the industry, right? The huge shakeup, and she focuses specifically on how readers access their reading. She says she doesn't think the topics would shift as much as accessibility and visibility to those topics will need to expand. Sales will drive everything. And so basically, she predicts that what readers want is what readers are going to get. Hawkins says that she thinks that the romance genre will continue to mirror the personal growth within society, that she sees more LGBTQ plus characters and more multiracial and more inclusive romances, and as a consequence, more book bans from conservative areas of our country, too. I want to point out in the state of Tennessee, currently romance novels are not banned, but there are talks to ban them as forms of pornography. Hawkins continues, as readers become more willing to buy more diverse books, authors will be encouraged to write them. She, too, like Foster, points to sales drive product. And Higgins' answer, again, long, but also quite revealing and honest, and I think very on point. She says that romance is already becoming much more diverse. Those categories that I mentioned earlier in the presentation are expanding almost weekly. So we do have much more diversity in the field in terms of LGBTQ plus options. We have any of the genres, historical or contemporary or paranormal or fantasy, you are now finding LGBTQ plus novels in those categories. So it's not just man plus woman. It can be woman plus woman, man plus man, woman plus two men, man plus two men, whatever is appealing. She says she sees publishers actively seeking out #own voices authors, hiring more diversely, though not fast enough, and educating themselves on the markets they've ignored. And here's where she makes a really valid point, and one of the major critiques of the romance writing industry, which is a topic for another presentation entirely. But she points out the lack of diversity in the authorship and the subjects for people of color. They had codes for, or the industry had codes, that's the they, for who they would choose to publish and who they would not, who they would choose to promote and who they would not. But she says that her view and her hope is that bookstores, readers will demand more diverse novels by more diverse authors. And she's right. If you look at the top romance novels of late 2022 and 2023, many of the romance novels and novelists are women of color, not just African American, but of other ethnicities as well. But she says, as far as what's coming in the next few years, you can never really predict what's hot. Did anyone really foresee BDSM romance becoming mainstream or unironic vampires in high school becoming all the rage? And for those who didn't know, 50 Shades of Grey is fan fiction. It was originally written as fan fiction of Twilight. So if you see any connection between Edward and Christian Grey, it's intentional. For a while, it was sicklit like John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. Give me a teenager with cancer and I'll give you a bestseller. Sometimes all it takes is one book, sometimes all it takes is a decade. We all get itchy for something, or maybe a little nostalgic too. So I'd like to close the presentation by indicating that it's important to note that feminism in romance novels is not something that is going to beat you over the head. It is something that is inherent, and we see it in the lives of the characters, in the development and growth of their relationships, and in the designs and constructions and the composition of their authors. So this last image, happily ever after, begins here. Because with romance novels and romance in general and love as a broad concept and an entity that we all crave and seek throughout our lives, there is no end. There's always a beginning. So I want to leave you with some final thoughts based on Women's History Month 2023. You have a story worth telling. You have history worth making, and a hell of a lot of taboos worth breaking. So go forth and embrace whatever smut makes you happy. Thank you.